Okay, I want to go over our CEAP project findings and results. One thing I want to stress at the start, you'll notice that it says Edge of Field report. This is the first of 3 reports that will be for this region. And this Edge of Field is, we're just looking at the nutrients delivered past the edges of the field, which means anything that leaves the production area, any conservation area, and again begins to interact with the water courses and water bodies. So our second report will be the in-stream results, so it's going to take everything from the edge of the field and then start delivering that to the mouth at Lake Erie. So we're going to route everything through there, so that's a more watershed report. You're probably more familiar with watershed type modeling than you are this edge of field modeling, because that's been pretty prevalent. A third report will be looking at the economics of what it's going to cost to do this. And this is a private-public cost, the whole put in together, because it's going to take, as the chief and everyone's been saying, it's not even going to take everybody in support. It's going to take dollars from everybody to do this. So those are the 3 reports, and this is just the first phase, which is the building block for which the other 2 will be happening. If I get this correct. Yeah. To give you a little idea of how we do this, we've long had this program called the National Resources Inventory. It's a statistical-based inventory of the nation's lands. It covers all land uses. We use a subset of that, the statistically randomly sampled subset, that we select the farmers that we're going to interview for the farmer interview. So we make sure we have the correct representation of corn, soybeans, and other types of rotations that are going on, as well as to make sure we have correct demographics. So we're not sampling all small landowners or large landowners. The NAS and the NRI statisticians work together so we have a good mix so we can represent the practices that are out there, because each of these different farm sizes would have different tendencies to adopt certain practices. So we collect the survey data. It goes into our field level model called APEX. And then I talked a little bit about the water quality model, which will be in our second report, and that's the SWOT model there. These models are housed, developed in Temple, Texas with ARS and Texas A&M. They've been used by NRCS. Actually, we probably, when we were SCS, began funding the development of these. So we've been in the modeling game since the early RCA reports and even started the modeling there with our support back in the 70s and early 80s. So we've had a long history there, which is why we're there. So the key thing to understand about these farmer surveys is that it is the farmer's voice. It's not filtered through an extension agent, a consultant, a group of experts, whatever you want to say, because those people will tend to have a perspective of those that they interact with. So the statistically random sampling that we go through, make sure we don't miss anybody, and that specifically those that don't participate a lot of times in our programs. We will pick those up just through the random sample. But it's their voice, unfiltered. It's a diary of what they've done over the last 3 years. And it captures all the investments in conservation, from those that are self-adopted by the farmer, those that are financially assisted and technical assistance from state and federal government or any other NGOs, and then those that are solely technical assistance alone. You'll notice that technical assistance alone and self-adopted are all on the private investment. So there's a significant amount of that that's going to have to go on investment in technology and changing your practices in order for this region to be successful. And that's been repeated several times today, and I was glad to hear that. So some key modeling concepts to understand about this information. One is that we use the past 52 years of weather as a surrogate for the next 52 years. This is a prospective modeling approach. We capture the practices that were there from 2010 to 2012 and model them such that if they were to stay in place for the next 50 years, these are the average annual results that you should expect. So if you take our results and then run off to a gauging station and look at the results and wonder why they don't match, well, that's because we're looking forward. All the time looking forward, not backwards, because we can't capture what people did 30 years ago in a statistical fashion. So it's looking ahead, that if these practices stay in place, this is where you're going to be. If you don't like where you're going to be in the next 50 years, then you change what you're doing. Just a little on the survey. It's a 44-page survey. We're going to try to lessen that. We're getting feedback that it's a little bit long, as you might imagine. They don't have to fill out the whole 44 pages. It just depends on what your operation is like. But right now, we're surveying the entire nation again, and we just finished this past fall, finished the 2015 season. We'll be coming up on the 2016 season of collecting the information for the whole nation. So this region will have 3 points in time to look at changes in conservation practices. We found that 5 years in time might be a little too short to statistically pick up a lot of change, which was one of the goals of this project, is to find out how quick things would change. But we found out their tillage, everything they did on the tillage end, fertilizers, pesticides, what conservation practices they're using. We found out everything they do over a 3-year period. That then is fed into our model to give us an estimate of the impacts using that information plus the landscape information that we get from the NRI point that tells us what soil types are out there. Who does the survey? The National Ag Statistics Service conducts the survey, but the actual people that go out to the farmers, and there may be some farmers in here that actually have had a survey brought to them, are enumerators, which are local part-time citizens that sign up. They're trained to do a one-on-one interview. It's extraordinarily confidential. And so it's basically a coffee room or coffee table chat over what you've done over the last 3 years. It's done that way so you don't have a professional maybe leading, or the farmer or landowner operator might be feeling judged about their answers or anything. It's just a nice free flow of information filling out the survey. And so there is a private component with the part-time employees of the NASA enumerators that do this, and they've been doing these type interviews for over 40 years, so they've gotten really good at training people in doing them. But the Ag Statistics Service is our big partner on the survey collection, data collection side. This is just talked about Apex model. Basically it's a process-based model, so it tries to mimic natural processes. Some models are empirical, so you have a change in X gives you a change in Y, and those are empirical models. This tries to incorporate different process-based models where they talk to each other on a daily basis. So any change every day, the calculations occur with the daily weather movement in and all those things. It's a very, very complex, very hard to use model. This is just a picture of where we try to track where everything's going. Anywhere water moves, we try to track the water. Now, I don't have tile line drawn in there yet, but I need to put one in. But anywhere the water's moving, we try to track where it's going and what it's carrying with it, and as well as track and estimate the crop production, so when water is then transpired from the plant, we have that idea too. So we get all those aspects of the water cycle in there, and then of course with that you get the production characteristics as well. Some of our key findings, this is from the handout. I'm going to go through with some of the statements we made in the key findings that you may have in front of you. You picked it up at the table this morning. And then some of the supporting information that goes behind why we say this. So one of the questions when we first came here with Chief White in the 2011 bloom, and we did a tour, and one of the big things that was out there is everybody was saying farmers have intensified their operations to take advantage of the increased commodity prices because they were skyrocketing. I think corn tripled and soybeans about doubled, somewhere in that range. So that was one of the questions. That was one of the causes of what's going on. So in the survey, what we found, they didn't change their crop mix. They stuck with what they were doing. Of course, with both commodities increasing, they were taking advantage of both commodities. Had there been a different commodity that was going down and one going up, you might have seen it. But that didn't happen. Fertilizer rates didn't go up, because a lot of times, the retailers and other costs start rising with the price of the commodity as well. So they didn't seem to make a big shift in their nutrient management either. So we didn't really see anything statistically to justify the notion that they intensified their operations due to commodity prices. And that was one of the big findings that we knee-jerk reaction told us that was going on. That really wasn't the occurrence. Basically, you have a perfect storm of a lake getting saturated with phosphorus. Disturbances like big storms will flush out the normal operations that are going on. from all the past sins and a few current sins, and you get what you get. So that's kind of what we're there. Interesting, 58% of the acres are applying an amount that is at removal rate for the crop they're harvesting or below, which means farmers were beginning to mine phosphorus that they recognizing was in excess in their system for this cycle. So that's another good indication that they weren't loading up and having more. Of course, there's 42% that weren't, that are above that, but 58% were at removal or below. Incorporating the nutrients increased from 2003 to 2006 to in 2012 from only 45% of all the phosphorus being applied was incorporated in the old survey to now 60% is being incorporated. So that's a big shift. It was statistically significant, and it's a really good indication that they're getting the mix in there, so it's not that as available to run off as it had been before. Edge of field practices increased from 18 to 31% of the acres have some somewhere. That doesn't mean they're strategically placed, we hope, and so there's not that many acres maybe being taken up by them, but there was a significant increase in the number of acres that had these in place somewhere out there in the landscape. And that's what really drove much of the change, or the last three factors, but basically the last two factors we saw the most change in the sediment losses. The cost of practices in place. This is something we're just now getting into doing a significant amount of analysis on, and it's really quite impressive nationwide and in this basin as well. This is the cost of what the value of those practices are now. If you took them all away and had to replace them, this is what it would cost. So this is kind of the value that we have right there. This represents all the costs borne by the landowners, by any federal cost share programs, any state programs, or any NGOs that had programs that had cost assistance or technical assistance with that. So the value in 03-06 was $208 million worth of conservation is on the landscape. That's about 40 some odd dollars per acre of conservation that's out there. That's a pretty good chunk. I think they mentioned today that our NRCS budget is $4 billion. Well, $208 million is, it's not all going there. That shows there's a big private investment that people are learning about conservation, taking it on their own, and putting it somewhere out on the landscape other than where we directly assisted them. We increased that in that short, 5 to 6 years of time. We increased that by nearly $69 million over that period of time to a total now of $277 million annually. This is not just a one-time expense. This is the annual conscious effort to have conservation on the land at $277 million, or $57 an acre. That's a pretty big investment in conservation out there as it is today. So we're talking about going further. So to go further, it's going to be even more money, because your marginal rate of return starts increasing dramatically as you're trying to squeeze each little bit out. Okay, voluntary conservation. It's making a significant impact in this region. Chief Weller talked about taking all the conservation away. If we were to do that $277 million that we have out there right now, if we were to take all that away, we talk about an 81% reduction that we have now would go away in sediment. The 36% reduction we have in nitrogen would go away. And without voluntary conservation, the 75%, or the 11.4 million pounds that we're currently keeping out of the streams, would be gone and come right back into the system. So we're doing a lot now, and we're asking to do more. And so the trick is, what does this information tell us about how to go forward to do more? Some more kind of supporting this voluntary notion. I talked about the NRI. If you just simply grab their data since 1982 when the system started, look at those erosion rates, almost around 15 to 16 million tons of erosion of sheet and reel there, and not what's coming out of the gullies, but just the sheet erosion out there. Pretty significant back then. And look at how we've dropped that over that time period. That's an outstanding result, going from nearly 16 million to just a little over 6 million tons of sheet and reel erosion. That's getting down there pretty low to about a ton and a half or less per acre per year. Another question, back in '82, with all that erosion, where is that now? Has it all been flushed out? Have we all dredged it all out? Is it still laying around somewhere? We don't know. We literally do not know. Modelers in the in-stream and the water quality efforts talk about delivery ratios, and delivery ratios of about 65% or the upper end of what's eroded today is delivered to the streams. So if someone is very good at calculus, you could probably sit back and start doing a calculation and get a rough envelope guess of how much may still be lingering around over that time period. I wasn't that good at calculus. I've tried this, and I'm not confident my numbers, or I'll tell you. I was good enough to pass. Just a real quick snapshot to talk about the results, about the voluntary approach and what kind of gains we're making under the current way we're operating. Without any practices, the average sediment loss, this is different from the sheet and reel erosion. Sediment loss is what's delivered. Sediment is what's delivered outside your farm system. The erosion is what we think of as happening inside the system. Once it goes out and is delivered to some type of a water body or water course, that's when we start calling it sediment. 2.5 tons in 03-06, we dropped that to 1.1, and that 18 to 31% jump and some of the other changes in tillages, not that much change in tillage, but most of these edge of fields have dropped it down to half. Science-wise and model prediction, I don't care what model you use, once you get down in that ton range, who knows? That ton's probably got 75 to 100% error in it. So it could be 1 to 2 tons, a half ton to 1.5. You're getting so small it's hard to measure. And if it's hard to measure, it's real hard to model. Total nitrogen you can see dropped, not quite as much. In tile systems we find that. Our agency kind of was born from an erosion era. And so our toolbox of subsurface control of nutrients is a lot smaller than our toolbox of surface control. And so, and even if we were to be focused on it, it's just a lot harder once something infiltrates into the soil profile and starts moving out to do any kind of control, whether with drainage, water management, wetlands, and those type things. So, not as much progress there. Total phosphorus. From 4.1 pounds per acre per year down to 1.9. That's a pretty good drop. The soluble, I have it broken out into tile and total soluble and those type things. But you can see we've made significant progress, and we're getting down in those ranges where there's not much more you can squeeze out of it. Even if you do, it's going to be hard to measure it. So we're getting down to where we have a limited margin of reduction possibilities. On an average. Obviously, there's people, when you have an average, you got those way out on one end, and those that there's no, they're as efficient as they're going to get. Some of the edge of field structural practices that you have out there. One thing we like to look at in all of our studies is how much are we adding practices together, practice combinations. We talked about 99% have one practice. One practice is never, ever, ever, ever enough. I don't care what system you're talking about, one practice is never enough. So we want to look at how many are we combining. And so we go from at least using one type of practice, went from 25 to 40%. This region is so flat, and I talked about our toolbox is largely made up of surface erosion control, so there's not a lot of need for structural practices in our classical way of thinking. This is where we now have to be less classical way of thinking. Some landscapes that we traditionally looked at as being flat and not needing certain practices, we might want to look at it and putting them out there. And maybe do a little extra, especially filter strips. I don't think we can put too few filter strips out there. 2 or more practices out there. Went from 9 to 15%. Of course, we got our statistical confidence, so all those statistically moved in our right direction. And then we have, people that have nothing at 45%. So there's a little bit of room to grow in that section.